Hey, what's up guys? Today we are going to discuss the crime of embezzlement, which is found in section 405 of the Penal Code. And in Singapore, embezzlement is not called embezzlement, it is called criminal breach of trust. And this is found in section 405 of the Penal Code. Now, section 405 provides that a person is said to have committed a criminal breach of trust if he dishonestly misuses property or funds that have been entrusted with him or been given dominion over. Such a person must have dishonestly misappropriated the property for his own use, dishonestly converted the property for his use, or dishonestly used or disposed of that property, violating any law or contract, or intentionally allowing another person to commit any of the acts that I just mentioned. Now, all forms of criminal breach of trust are arrestable offences, and arrestable offences simply means that a suspect can be arrested without a warrant if he or she has committed an arrestable offence. It is up to the police or the court to determine whether or not to release the suspect on bail once they have been apprehended. Now, certain elements are required for an offence to be categorized as a criminal breach of trust. Number one, the person must be given supervisory control over the property in question, over the property, the finances, or other assets. Number two, the person must also have engaged dishonestly and with the deliberate objective of obtaining an unlawful gain for himself or another person. This includes the purpose to allow someone else to act dishonestly. Proof of intention is an essential ingredient for this offence, and the charge will not stand if the person was just mistaken or negligent. Number three, there has to be conversion or misappropriation of the property. Conversion is the act of dealing with or using someone else's property as if it was your own. That's called conversion. Whereas misappropriation is the act of pocketing property, taking something, like, for example, stealing money that is intended for another purpose. Now, almost all criminal breach of trust cases include the misuse of property. Now, if a person's job imposes a legal or contractual responsibility on that person, and that person violates that duty, that person may be held criminally liable for a breach of trust. For example, the executor of a will has a legal obligation to distribute assets in accordance with the wishes of the deceased who made the will. If he steals money for himself, then such an act will result in a criminal breach of trust. The same is true for a contractual obligation. For example, under an employment contract for a courier company enters into an employment contract with a courier, okay? And the employment contract requires the courier to deliver goods to customers for the courier company. Now, if the courier steals some of the goods during the course of his employment, then that would result in criminal breach of trust in an employment context. Now, allowing another person to misuse property can also be criminal breach of trust. If a person is entrusted with property or money and allows someone else to dishonestly take it, that person will still be responsible for criminal breach of trust, even if he himself did not misuse or steal the property himself. Now, under section 406 of the Penal Code, if a person is found guilty of criminal breach of trust, he can be imprisoned for a term not exceeding 7 years, or with a fine, or both. Now, certain forms of criminal breach of trust will attract harsher penalties due to the need to deter such crimes. The first type of criminal breach of trust which attracts enhanced penalties would include property entrusted for transportation or storage. If a person commits criminal breach of trust over property that he was entrusted with for transportation or storage for rent or charge, such a person is liable to imprisonment for a term which may extend to 15 years in prison and shall also be liable to a fine. To give you an illustration, a courier or a courier company is an example of a person who is entrusted with property for the purpose of transportation for hire. And a warehouse owner or warehouse operator is an example of a person who is entrusted with property for the purpose of storage, for rent or charge. Therefore, if a warehouse owner steals things that are in the warehouse, that are stored in the warehouse, he will be liable for the enhanced penalties under this section. Next, criminal breach of trust by employees. As I mentioned earlier, there is a strong need for deterrence to deter employees from stealing money from customers, from their company or whatever. If an employee has been entrusted with property or dominion over any property and he commits a criminal breach of trust in respect of that property, he also, an employee, can be liable if he is found guilty of criminal breach of trust to enhance penalties of up to 15 years imprisonment and a fine. So, employees stealing money or employees stealing money from customers that are meant to be given over to the company, okay, this will attract harsher penalties. It should also be noted that the definition of employees also includes those people who are working with the same qualities as those of an employee. Therefore, even if they are not formally employed under an employment contract, or the person works on an ad hoc basis, he will still be liable, as if he were an employee. So, for example, if a friend of mine helps me, okay, at my office, but I don't pay him a salary, but he works in the capacity of an employee and he steals money from my company, he would be liable to criminal breach of trust, even though he's not officially an employee. The final class of persons who attract the highest penalties for criminal breach of trust include public servants, bankers, merchants, agents in the legal sense, not like real estate agent, directors of companies, officers of a company, partners of a partnership, key executives, or fiduciaries. If such persons commit a criminal breach of trust in the capacity of their power and position, they will be liable for the harshest punishment out of all the aggravated forms of criminal breach of trust, and that is 20 years imprisonment and a fine. So thanks for watching this video on criminal breach of trust. Do stay tuned for the next few videos where I will discuss specific scenarios and cases.